The cold darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions as the Zephyrian fleet drifted through the void like ghosts of a once mighty civilization. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display that showed their formation of crystal ships moving slowly through the binary star system. His forearms hung at his sides as he watched. The red dots on the screen multiply and spread like a disease across the star map. The Ravager swarm was coming for them again. Kextar had seen this same sight dozens of times over the past 8 months. Every time his people thought they had found safety, every time they believed they had outrun the nightmare that had consumed their homeworld, the red dots would appear on their sensors. The bioships of the Ravager hive mind never stopped hunting. They never grew tired. They never gave up. Behind him, his bridge crew worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency of beings who had accepted their fate. Communications Officer Villani monitored the long-range sensors, while Tactical Specialist Morgan calculated firing solutions that everyone knew would be useless. The weapons of the Zephyrian Confederacy had once been the most advanced in the galaxy, but they were nothing against the adaptive armor of the Ravagers. The creature ships that made up the swarm were not built by any known technology. They were grown, shaped by the collective will of billions of connected minds that thought as one. Each bioship could change its structure in seconds, adapting to any weapon fired against it. Energy beams were absorbed and converted to fuel. Kinetic projectiles were deflected by hull plating that shifted like liquid metal. Even nuclear weapons barely scratched their surface before the damaged areas healed themselves. Kextar remembered the first time he had seen a Ravager fleet. It had been 3 years ago, when the advanced scouts had detected the swarm approaching the outer colonies of Zephyrian space. The reports had seemed impossible then. Ships that ate planets, creatures that consumed entire star systems and turned the matter into more of themselves. The Confederacy Council had dismissed the warnings as the fevered imaginings of colonial settlers who had been isolated too long. They learned the truth when the Ravagers reached Zephyr Prime. The Admiral closed his eyes and tried not to remember that day, the sight of his beautiful homeworld being stripped away layer by layer as millions of bioships descended like locusts. The screams over the communication channels as the evacuation ships tried desperately to save as many civilians as possible. The final transmission from the planetary defense grid as it was overrun and consumed. In 3 days, a world that had been home to 12 billion Zephyrians became nothing but empty space and floating debris that the Ravagers had found inedible. Now the survivors numbered less than 2 million, scattered across 47 ships that ranged from military vessels to converted cargo haulers. They had been running ever since, jumping from system to system, always staying one step ahead of the swarm that followed their trail like a pack of hungry predators. "Admiral," Villani called out, her voice steady despite the fear that Kextar could see in her large violet eyes. "Long-range sensors are picking up the swarm signature. Distance is approximately 42 light hours and closing." Kextar nodded and moved to stand behind her station. The tactical display showed what they all dreaded seeing. The red dots that represented individual Ravager bioships numbered in the tens of thousands. Conservative estimates put the swarm size at around 40,000 vessels, each one the size of a Zephyrian cruiser or larger. Some of the readings suggested bioships that were massive beyond comprehension, living space stations that could devour moons. "Time to intercept?" he asked. 18 standard hours at their current velocity, Morgan replied from his tactical station. "They are not trying to hide their approach. The hive mind knows we cannot escape." The Admiral looked around at his bridge crew and saw his own resignation reflected in their faces. They had run this calculation too many times before. The Zephyrian fleet could not outrun the bioships in normal space, and they did not have enough fuel for another hyperspace jump. Even if they did, the Ravagers would simply follow their trail and catch them in the next system. "Send a message to all ships in the fleet," Kextar said quietly. "Tell the civilian captains that they should prepare their people. We will make our stand here, but the outcome is already decided." As Villani began transmitting the orders, Kextar walked to the main view screen and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden among the distant points of light, the swarm was approaching. In less than a day, those same stars would be witness to the final chapter of Zephyrian civilization. He thought about his people aboard the civilian transports, families who had lost everything but still clung to hope, children who had been born in the refugee ships and had never seen a real world. Scientists and artists and engineers who carried the accumulated knowledge of a species that had reached for the stars and touched them. All of it would be gone soon. The Ravagers would consume the ships and add the biological matter to their own mass. The knowledge would be lost. The culture would be forgotten. In a few years, when other species detected the remains of this battle, they would find only empty space and perhaps a few fragments of crystal hull plating drifting in the void. The tactical officer spoke again, his voice breaking the silence that had fallen over the bridge. "Sir, the civilian ship captain's quarter is requesting permission to broadcast a final message to any ships that might be listening. They want to create a record of what happened to our people." Kextar considered this for a moment. It seemed futile, but perhaps some other species would find the message someday and learn from their fate. Maybe the next civilization that encountered the Ravagers would be better prepared. "Grant permission," he said. "Tell them to make it clear that the Ravagers cannot be stopped by conventional weapons. Perhaps our death can serve as a warning to others." The hours that followed passed like a slow dream. The crew went about their duties with mechanical precision, while the countdown to destruction ticked away on every screen. Some of the younger officers tried to maintain conversations about tactical possibilities and escape routes, but the veterans knew better. They had seen too many battles against the bioships to believe in miracles. As the time remaining dropped below 2 hours, Kextar found himself standing alone in his private quarters, looking at a holographic image of Zephyr Prime as it had been before the attack. The crystal cities that had grown like beautiful flowers across the continents, the orbital gardens that had supplied food for the entire system, the great libraries where the history of his people had been preserved for thousands of years, all gone now, existing only in the memories of the survivors who would soon join their lost world in oblivion. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to his quarters. Kextar authorized the door to open and found Villani standing in the corridor, her uniform neat despite the circumstances. "Admiral," she said, stepping inside, "I wanted to thank you for bringing us this far. My family died on Zephyr Prime, but the months we have had since then were a gift that I will always treasure." Kextar nodded, unable to find words to respond. They stood together in comfortable silence, two beings who had done their duty and found peace in that knowledge even as death approached from the darkness between the stars. The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship had fallen into the quiet calm that comes before death when the impossible happened. Villani was monitoring the long-range sensors when her station suddenly began flashing with new contacts. She stared at the display for several seconds, certain that her equipment was malfunctioning. "Admiral," she called out, her voice uncertain, "I am detecting new ships approaching from Vector 79 Alpha. 12 vessels, unknown configuration." Kextar moved quickly to her station and studied the sensor readings. The approaching ships were unlike anything in the Zephyrian database. They were small compared to the massive bioships of the Ravager swarm, constructed from what appeared to be refined metals rather than grown organic material. The design was crude but functional, with sharp angles and blocky shapes that suggested a species more concerned with utility than beauty. "Distance and speed?" he asked. "They are approximately 6 light hours away and accelerating toward our position. Their trajectory will bring them into contact with the Ravager swarm in roughly 4 hours. Morgan looked up from his tactical station, with confusion written across his features. "Sir, their course does not make sense. They are heading directly toward the center of the swarm formation. If they are fleeing refugees like ourselves, they should be moving away from the bioships." Kextar studied the tactical display more carefully. The unknown ships were indeed moving straight toward the Ravagers, but their formation suggested something other than panic. The vessels maintained perfect spacing and moved with the precision of a military unit. Either these beings were incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. The communication board suddenly came alive with an incoming signal. The transmission was crude compared to Zephyrian technology, broadcast on basic mathematical frequencies that any spacefaring species would recognize. Villani quickly ran it through the translation protocols and activated the main speakers. "Unknown fleet. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Liberty's Edge. We are tracking hostile biological signatures in your vicinity. Are you in need of assistance?" The bridge crew exchanged glances of amazement. None of them had ever heard of humans before. The species was not in any of their databases, and their technology seemed primitive compared to the advanced civilizations that the Zephyrians had encountered in their expansion across the galaxy. Respond to them, Kekstar ordered. Tell them we are the survivors of the Zephyrian Confederacy, and that we face extinction from the Ravager swarm. Warn them that these bioships cannot be stopped by any known weapon. Vellani composed the message and transmitted it on the same frequency. The response came back within minutes, the human voice calm and steady, despite the situation they were flying into. Admiral Kekstar, we copy your transmission. We have been tracking these bioships across multiple sectors. We know what the Ravagers are and what they can do. Hold your current position and keep your civilian ships back. We are going to handle this situation. Morgan checked his sensors again and shook his head in disbelief. Sir, those human ships are accelerating directly toward the swarm center. The bioships number in the tens of thousands. This is madness. Through the main view screen, they could now see the Ravager swarm approaching as individual specks of darkness against the stars. The bioships moved with the fluid grace of living creatures, their organic hulls shifting and changing as they traveled. Some were sleek like ocean predators, while others were massive and bloated like deep space leviathans. All of them pulsed with the same malevolent intelligence that had consumed worlds across the galaxy. The 12 human ships looked pathetically small in comparison. Each vessel was roughly the size of a Zephyrian frigate, but their design suggested a species that built their technology for war rather than exploration. The hulls were covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Strange projections and antenna arrays stuck out at odd angles like the spines of some mechanical creature. Admiral, Vellani reported, I am receiving additional transmissions from the human fleet. They appear to be coordinating their approach using encrypted channels. Can you decode their communications? Negative, sir. Their encryption is surprisingly sophisticated for such primitive technology. Kekstar watched as the human ships drew closer to the swarm. Any moment now, the Ravagers would detect the new arrivals and begin their attack. The bioships had sensors that could track individual life forms from incredible distances. They would know exactly how many humans were aboard each vessel and would begin the process of adaptation before the first shot was fired. There, Morgan announced. The swarm is responding. Outer elements are moving to intercept the human formation. On the tactical display, thousands of red dots began shifting position as the Ravager hive mind focused its attention on the new threat. The bioships moved like a single organism, flowing around obstacles and concentrating their force where it would be most effective. Within minutes, the human ships would be surrounded and overwhelmed. But something strange was happening. Instead of maintaining their formation and fighting as a unit, the human ships suddenly scattered in all directions. They broke apart like a flock of birds, each vessel taking a different course through the swarm. The Ravagers, programmed to respond to concentrated threats, seemed confused by this tactic. What are they doing? Vellani asked. They have abandoned any chance of mutual support. Before anyone could answer, the first human ship reached the edge of the swarm. What happened next defied everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about space combat. The human vessel did not slow down or attempt to engage the bioships in a traditional battle. Instead, it accelerated even faster and began flying in an erratic pattern that made no tactical sense. It spun and rolled and changed direction seemingly at random while firing weapons in all directions. The Ravagers tried to adapt to this strange behavior, but their biological systems were designed to counter logical tactics. They could evolve defenses against energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, but they had no response to complete chaos. More human ships reached the swarm and began their own insane maneuvers. One vessel flew backwards while shooting, something that violated every principle of space warfare. Another began ramming bioships directly, using its own hull as a weapon instead of preserving itself for continued combat. The most shocking sight was a human ship that suddenly reversed all thrust and began flying in a perfect spiral pattern while launching what appeared to be mining charges. The explosions created expanding spheres of superheated plasma that forced the bioships to alter course or take damage. They are not trying to win, Kekstar realized with growing amazement. They are trying to disrupt the swarm formation. As if to confirm his observation, one of the human vessels broadcast a message on an open channel. The voice belonged to a female human who sounded completely calm, despite flying through a storm of hostile bioships. Ghost leader to all units. Pattern Omega-7 is working. The biologics cannot adapt to random behavior. Continue evasive maneuvers and herd them toward the target zone. Target zone. The humans had a plan beyond simple survival. They were using themselves as bait to guide the Ravager swarm toward some predetermined location. Kextar studied his tactical display and tried to determine where the humans were leading the bioships. The answer came to him slowly as he traced the projected course through the star system. "They are heading toward the asteroid field," he announced to his bridge crew. But what could they hope to accomplish there? The question would be answered soon enough. The human ships continued their impossible dance through the swarm, taking losses but never breaking formation. For every vessel that was destroyed by the bioships, 2 more appeared to take its place in the deadly ballet. These humans fought like no species the Zephyrians had ever encountered. They seemed to embrace chaos as a weapon and use their own apparent weakness as a source of strength. Whatever they had planned, it was unlike anything in the military databases of a dozen civilizations. The fate of the Zephyrian survivors now rested in the hands of beings they had never met, who fought battles in ways that defied all logic and reason. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the armrests of his command chair as the Liberty's Edge dove deeper into the writhing mass of Ravager bioships. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had faced impossible odds before and somehow survived to tell the tale. The main view screen showed a nightmare of organic shapes and grasping tentacles as bioships the size of city blocks tried to surround his small vessel. "All ships, this is Morrison. Execute pattern Omega-7. Remember, we are not here to fight fair. We are here to confuse these things until they do not know which way is up." The human fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane as each ship began its own chaotic dance through the swarm. Morrison had spent months studying the Ravager attack patterns, and he had discovered something that no other species had realized. The bioships were perfect predators, but they were also perfectly logical. They adapted to threats in predictable ways and responded to standard military tactics with devastating efficiency. But humans had never been accused of being logical in their approach to warfare. Lieutenant Sarah Blake piloted her fighter, the Wildfire, through a series of maneuvers that would have made any flight instructor scream in horror. She flew upside down and backwards while firing mining charges into empty space between the bioships. The explosions created clouds of superheated gas that forced the creatures to change course or take damage to their adaptive armor. "Ghost Squadron, lay down suppression fire on grid 77 Alpha," she called out over the communication channel. "Make them think we are trying to break through their formation in that sector." The bioships immediately began moving to counter the apparent breakthrough attempt, massing their forces in the designated area while the human ships slipped past their defenses in completely different directions. It was a shell game played at relativistic speeds with the survival of 2 species hanging in the balance. Commander Ryan Hughes aboard the destroyer Reaper's Dance was pursuing an even more dangerous strategy. His ship was built like a battering ram, with reinforced hull plating and shock absorbers that could survive tremendous impacts. He had already rammed 3 bioships, crushing their organic hulls with simple kinetic force before they could adapt to the attack. "Brace for impact," Hughes announced calmly as his ship lined up on another target. "These things can evolve defenses against energy weapons and radiation, but they still have to obey the laws of physics." The Reaper's Dance struck the bioship at nearly 1/10 the speed of light. The creature's adaptive armor, designed to disperse and absorb various forms of energy, crumpled like paper against 2,000 tons of human engineering. The bioship split apart and died before its healing systems could respond to the damage. But the most impressive display of human tactical thinking came from Captain Lisa Chen and her corvette, the Dancing Devil. Her ship was the smallest in the fleet, barely larger than a Zephyrian shuttle, but she flew it like an extension of her own body. She had been performing impossible maneuvers for the past hour, flying in patterns that made no sense to any military analyst. The Dancing Devil suddenly reversed thrust and began flying backwards while continuing to fire its weapons forward. The bioships, programmed by millions of years of evolution to pursue fleeing prey, followed her directly into a trap where 3 other human ships were waiting with nuclear torpedoes. The resulting explosions sent shockwaves through the local swarm formation. But the humans were not finished with their surprises. Morrison watched his tactical display as the plan began to unfold exactly as they had rehearsed. The human fleet was not trying to destroy the Ravager swarm through conventional combat. That would be impossible given their numerical disadvantage. Instead, they were herding the bioships toward the asteroid field where Commander Tony Martinez waited, with the most important ship in the fleet. Martinez commanded a modified cargo hauler called the Steel Thunder. His vessel looked unremarkable compared to the sleek warships around him, but it carried the most valuable cargo in human space. For 3 weeks, his engineering teams had been preparing for this moment, working around the clock to create something that had never been attempted before. Steel Thunder to all units. Martinez broadcast as his ship broke away from the main formation. The package is ready for delivery. Beginning final approach to the target asteroid. The asteroid in question was a massive chunk of rock and ice that had been drifting through this system for millions of years. To casual observation, it appeared no different from thousands of similar objects scattered throughout the asteroid field, but appearances could be deceiving. Martinez guided his ship toward the asteroid on what appeared to be a collision course. The Ravager bioships, sensing an opportunity to eliminate one of their tormentors, began converging on his position. Thousands of organic vessels followed him like a school of predatory fish chasing wounded prey. "All hands, prepare for separation," Martinez announced to his crew. "Escape pods will launch in 30 seconds. It has been an honor serving with you." The Steel Thunder continued its approach to the asteroid, while the crew abandoned ship in small escape pods that scattered in all directions. Martinez remained at his post until the last possible moment, making fine course corrections to ensure his ship would strike the asteroid at exactly the right angle. The collision, when it came, appeared anticlimactic. The cargo hauler struck the asteroid and exploded in a brief flash of nuclear fire. The bioships that had been pursuing it paused in confusion, uncertain why their prey had chosen to destroy itself in such a meaningless gesture. Then the real explosion began. The asteroid cracked open like an egg, revealing that its core was not rock and ice as it appeared. Hidden inside the hollow center was a magnetic containment system that the humans had somehow constructed during their weeks of preparation. The containment field held something that should not have existed in nature: pure antimatter in quantities that staggered the imagination. The antimatter cascade that followed lit up the entire star system. The chain reaction consumed not just the asteroid, but everything within a radius of several million kilometers. Half the Ravager swarm simply ceased to exist, converted to energy in accordance with the fundamental laws of the universe. The surviving bioships reeled from the unexpected assault, their perfect biological systems struggling to comprehend what had just happened. They had evolved defenses against every known form of attack, but no living creature could adapt to complete annihilation on an atomic level. But the humans were not finished with their demonstration of tactical innovation. As the shock waves from the antimatter explosion began to fade, the remaining human vessels regrouped and prepared for the second phase of their plan. Morrison's voice crackled over the communication channels as he coordinated the next stage of the operation. "All ships, deploy the packages. Let's give these creatures something they have never encountered before." From the cargo bays of each surviving human ship came swarms of small objects that spread out through the local space like seeds scattered by the wind. They were not weapons in any conventional sense, but they would prove to be more effective than any missile or energy beam that had ever been fired in anger. The small objects that emerged from the human cargo bays looked harmless enough as they drifted through space toward the surviving Ravager bioships. Admiral Kexter watched through his view screen as hundreds of these mysterious devices spread out in all directions, each one no larger than a Zephyrian personal transport pod. They moved without any visible propulsion system, floating on momentum and gravity like debris from the recent battle. The bioships seemed to ignore them at first. The Ravager hive mind was focused on the remaining human vessels, trying to understand the tactical patterns that had led to such devastating losses. The creatures had never encountered an enemy that used chaos as a weapon, and their collective intelligence was struggling to adapt to the humans' unpredictable behavior. But the small objects were not debris. They were something far more dangerous to the Ravagers than any weapon that had ever been designed. The first package reached a bioship and immediately began to unfold like a mechanical flower. What emerged was a collection of robotic arms and cutting tools that attached themselves to the creature's hull with magnetic clamps. The bioship tried to shake off the device, but the robot held firm and began its programmed task. It started to build something. Within minutes, More packages had reached other bioships and begun the same process. The robots were not trying to damage the creatures or penetrate their adaptive armor. Instead, they were using the bioships themselves as raw material for construction projects that defied all logic. Lieutenant Sarah, Blake watched from her fighter as one of the robots began converting a section of bioship hull into what appeared to be a communication array. The device was crude by human standards, built from salvaged organic matter and spare parts that the robot carried in its internal storage compartments. "Morrison, are you seeing this?" She called over the communication channel. "The packages are building something on the bioships themselves." "That's the plan," Morrison replied from the bridge of Liberty's Edge. "Those are modified industrial robots, mining mechs, construction equipment, and fabrication units that we retrofitted for this specific mission. They have one simple directive programmed into their systems." The robots continued their work with mechanical precision, ignoring the bioship's attempts to dislodge them. Some of the creatures tried to adapt their hulls to reject the foreign objects, but the robots had been designed to work with hostile environments. They simply adjusted their grip and continued building. What they were constructing became clear as more devices came online throughout the swarm. Each robot was building a jamming transmitter, using the bioship's own organic matter as components for the electronic systems. The transmitters were crude and ugly, but they served their purpose perfectly. The Ravager hive mind depended on constant communication between all members of the swarm. Each bioship was connected to every other bioship through a network of biological signals that allowed them to think and act as a single organism. It was this collective intelligence that made them so dangerous, allowing them to adapt and evolve their tactics in real time. But the human-built jammers were designed to disrupt that communication network. The first bioship to lose contact with the hive mind stopped moving and began drifting aimlessly through space. Its organic systems continued to function, but without the guiding intelligence of the collective, it had no purpose or direction. It was like a single brain cell separated from the rest of the nervous system. More bioships began losing contact as additional jammers came online. The effect spread through the swarm like a virus, cutting communication links and isolating individual creatures from their collective consciousness. Within an hour, thousands of bioships were floating dead in space, their biological functions intact but their higher intelligence severed. The remaining bioships that still maintained contact with the hive mind began to behave erratically. Some turned on their isolated companions, attacking them as if they were foreign threats. Others simply stopped moving altogether, overwhelmed by the loss of so much collective processing power. Commander Ryan Hughes observed the chaos from the Bridge of Reapers dance and shook his head in amazement. "I've seen a lot of battle tactics in my time, but turning the enemy's own communication system against them is something new." "It gets better," Morrison replied. "Watch what happens next." The robots that had been building jammers now switched to their secondary programming. They began constructing new devices on the bioships, but these were not designed to disrupt communication. Instead, they were transmitters that would send new signals into the creature's biological systems. The humans had not just cut off the Ravager hive mind from its individual components. They had given those components a new set of instructions. The isolated bioships suddenly began moving again, but their behavior was completely different from before. Instead of hunting and consuming everything in their path, they started working together to build structures in space. The creatures that had been perfect predators were now compelled by their new programming to become creators, using their own organic matter and materials salvaged from the battlefield. The bioships began constructing what appeared to be habitation modules. They worked with the same biological efficiency that had made them such deadly hunters, but now their efforts were directed toward creation rather than destruction. Admiral Kekstar watched in disbelief as enemy bioships that had been trying to kill his people just hours earlier began building what looked like cities in space. The structures were unlike anything in Zephyrian architecture, grown rather than built, but they were clearly designed to support life. "How is this possible?" he asked his communications officer. Villani was monitoring the transmissions from the human-built devices and trying to understand their function. The humans appear to have reprogrammed the creature's base instincts. Instead of an urge to consume and reproduce, the bioships now have an overwhelming compulsion to build habitats. The construction continued at an incredible pace. The bioships worked without rest, using their biological systems to grow living cities that floated in the void. Atmospheric processors emerged from their hulls to create breathable environments. Agricultural systems sprouted from their organic matter to produce food. What had been instruments of destruction were becoming the foundation for new worlds. Some of the bioships began incorporating debris from the recent battle into their construction projects. Fragments of human ships and Zephyrian vessels were woven into the growing structures, creating a unique blend of technologies that had never been seen before. Morrison's voice came over the communication channel again, addressing the Zephyrian fleet directly. "Admiral Kextar, you might want to send some scouts to examine what they're building. I think you'll find it interesting." A small Zephyrian scout ship approached one of the growing structures and transmitted detailed scans back to the flagship. The readings showed a complex of interconnected habitats with life support systems, living quarters, and recreational areas. It was a complete city designed to house thousands of beings in comfort and safety. "They're building homes for us," Kextar realized with growing wonder. "The bioships are constructing a new world for my people." The irony was not lost on anyone watching the scene unfold. The creatures that had destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld were now building a replacement with their own bodies and biological systems. The perfect predators had become perfect builders, their deadly efficiency redirected toward an entirely different purpose. But the most remarkable aspect of the human plan was still to come. As the construction continued, it became clear that the bioships were not just building random structures. They were creating an integrated ecosystem that could support not just the Zephyrian survivors, but potentially millions of beings from dozens of different species. The humans had not just saved the Zephyrians from extinction, they had turned their greatest enemy into the foundation for a new beginning. 3 days after the battle that should have ended with the extinction of the Zephyrian people, Admiral Kextar stood in the observation lounge of the newly constructed orbital city and watched his children play in gardens that had been grown from the bodies of their former enemies. The sight still filled him with wonder and confusion in equal measure. The bioships had worked without rest since receiving their new programming, transforming themselves into the most beautiful space habitats he had ever seen. The structures were alive in ways that traditional construction could never achieve, with walls that breathed and adjusted to maintain perfect atmospheric conditions. Plants grew directly from the organic surfaces, creating parks and recreational areas that seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the artificial environment. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside him at the viewport, his weathered face showing the exhaustion that came from months of hunting Ravager swarms across the galaxy. The human wore a simple uniform that had seen better days, but his eyes held a warmth that Kextar had come to associate with his species during their brief acquaintance. "Your people are adapting well to their new home," Morrison observed, watching a group of young Zephyrians chase each other through a maze of flowering vines that served as both playground equipment and air purification system. "It is more than we ever dared to hope for," Kextar replied. "When we fled our homeworld, we thought we were carrying the last remnants of our civilization toward certain death. Now we have a new world that is in many ways superior to the one we lost." The living city continued to grow around them as more bioships integrated themselves into the expanding structure. Each creature brought its own unique capabilities to the construction project, creating specialized areas for different functions. Some bioships had become manufacturing centers where tools and equipment could be produced from raw organic matter. Others had transformed into educational facilities where Zephyrian knowledge could be preserved and shared with future generations. Morrison had explained that this was not the first time humans had attempted this kind of conversion, but it was the largest and most successful example to date. His people had been fighting the Ravagers for 2 years, always arriving too late to save the civilizations under attack. The Zephyrians were the first group they had managed to reach in time to make a difference. "We learned something important during our own difficult times," Morrison said, continuing their conversation. "The universe is vast and mostly empty, but sometimes you discover that you are not alone in it. When that happens, you have a choice to make about what kind of neighbor you want to be." Kextar had heard similar words from the human captain before, but they still struck him as remarkable coming from a species that seemed to specialize in turning impossible situations to their advantage. During the past 3 days, he had learned much about human history and their approach to problem solving. Humans had not always been the confident warriors who had saved his people. They had spent most of their existence struggling against predators and natural disasters on their homeworld, developing an instinctive understanding of how to survive when the odds were against them. This experience had taught them that conventional solutions often failed when facing truly dangerous threats. The Ravagers were the ultimate expression of biological perfection, evolved over millions of years to be efficient predators and unstoppable consumers. But humans had spent their entire evolutionary history dealing with perfect predators, and they had learned the most important lesson of all about such creatures. No predator could adapt to prey that refused to behave like prey. "Admiral," a voice called from behind them. Villani approached with a datapad containing the daily reports from throughout the growing city. "The bioship integration is proceeding ahead of schedule. We now have living space for nearly 3 million beings with room for expansion as needed." 3 million? Kexter asked in surprise. "But our population is barely 2 million. The humans suggested that we design the city to accommodate other refugee species," Villani explained. "Captain Morrison's people have been tracking several other civilizations that are fleeing Ravager attacks. They believe we could offer sanctuary to survivors from multiple worlds." The idea of transforming their new home into a refuge for other species had not occurred to Kextar, but it made perfect sense when he considered the scale of the Ravager threat. Across the galaxy, hundreds of civilizations were probably facing the same extinction that had nearly claimed his own people. If the humans could replicate their success here, they could potentially save millions of lives. Morrison nodded when Kextar mentioned this possibility. "That was always part of the plan. We've been fighting a defensive war against the Ravagers for too long, always one step behind and never able to save everyone. But if we can establish safe havens like this one, we can start to turn the tide." "You speak as if this is just the beginning," Kextar observed. "It is. My people have identified at least 20 star systems where we could attempt similar conversions. Each success gives us more resources and more allies in the fight against the swarm. Eventually, we hope to have enough converted bioships to start reclaiming worlds that have already been consumed." The scope of the human plan was staggering in its ambition. They were not content to simply survive the Ravager threat or even to defeat it. They wanted to reverse the damage that had already been done and restore the civilizations that had been lost. As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Sarah Blake arrived in the observation lounge with news from the human fleet. Her fighter pilot uniform was rumpled and she looked like she had not slept in days, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "Captain, we've received word from the Wildfire reconnaissance mission. They found another refugee fleet 3 systems away, the Corvalian hegemony, about 400,000 survivors being pursued by a medium-sized swarm." Morrison immediately shifted into command mode. "How long until the swarm reaches them?" "Approximately 36 hours at current speeds. But sir, this could be our chance to test the new rapid deployment protocol. Some of the converted bioships have volunteered to assist in the rescue mission." Kextar looked at Morrison with growing understanding. "You are going to leave already?" "We have to. Those people are facing the same fate that threatened your civilization. We cannot let that happen when we have the power to prevent it." The Admiral felt a strange mixture of sadness and pride as he realized that the humans would soon depart to continue their mission. In the short time since their arrival, Morrison and his people had become more than rescuers. They had become friends and teachers, showing the Zephyrians new ways to think about cooperation and mutual aid. "Will we see you again?" Kexter asked. Morrison smiled and gestured toward the growing city around them. "Admiral, this place is going to become a beacon of hope for every refugee fleet in the galaxy. We'll be back regularly, and we'll be bringing friends." As the human captain prepared to leave, Kextar realized that he had witnessed something more significant than a military victory or a daring rescue. He had seen the birth of a new kind of civilization, one based on the radical idea that survival was not a competition, but a collaborative effort. The humans departed the next morning, taking with them a small fleet of converted bioships that had volunteered for the rescue mission. Behind them, they left a living city that continued to grow and change, adapting itself to meet the needs of its inhabitants, while preparing to welcome new arrivals from across the stars. In the months that followed, as more refugee fleets found their way to the sanctuary, Kextar would often return to the observation lounge where he had first spoken with Morrison. He would watch ships arrive carrying survivors from dozens of different species, all of them finding safety and hope in a place that had been built from the bodies of their former enemies. The universe was still vast and cold, but it was no longer empty. It was full of neighbors who had learned that the best way to survive was to help each other thrive.